You're tuned in to Church on the Couch with Regal Heights. Welcome. We're really glad you're here. We are a joy-filled family of Christ's ambassadors who want to impact the lives of all generations. We want to help you on your faith walk. A faith walk is not something that you should endeavor to do alone. We are here to help you. We've got resources. We've got people you can talk to. We've got people who can pray for you as well. So please reach out and let us know if you're just starting on your journey, you're new joining us here today, or maybe you've been watching for a while and you just feel that little nudge to reach out. Please do so. We are here for you, and we are here and happy to help you. So please do. For those of our church family who are tuning in from home, we want to say hello, we miss you. We pray that you are doing well, and thank you for tuning in. Please share this with your family and friends so that the gospel gets out to everyone out on the internet. We thank you so much that you have been tuning in. People have been connecting. It's been a wonderful journey for us here. Let me pray for you very quickly before we get into the service. Dear Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for giving us this technology, this ability to reach into each person's home who tunes in. God, I pray for each and every heart that's watching right now. God, you know their wants and their needs. And Father, you know what they're struggling with. And nothing is too big for you, Lord. There's no question that you can't answer. So Father, I pray that you would move on the hearts of people. If they have questions, to reach out. We are happy to be your hands and feet. We are happy to dispense mercy on your behalf, Lord. I pray that you would bless Pastor Jason as he brings a message from your word today. I pray that it would speak to our hearts and it would move us into Christian action. Father, I thank you so much for this day. You are good, and we thank you. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Before creation, eternity in your hand, you spoke the earth into motion, my soul now stands. You stood before my failure, carry the cross from my shame. My sin weighed upon your shoulder, my soul now to stand. So what can I say? And what can I do? Offer this heart on God, completely to you. So I walk upon salvation, your spirit alive in me, this life to declare your promise, my soul now to stand. So what can I say? And what can I do? But offer this heart on God, completely to you. So what can I say? What can I do, God, but offer this heart on God, completely to you. So I'll stand. For your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire. In darkest night, you are close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing in the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. Oh, your goodness is running after, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Yes, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
Daniel Part 3, God's Perfect Sovereignty. Hi, welcome back to Regal Heights Church, Church on the Couch. We're glad you've tuned in with us. We are here today back in the book of Daniel. We're going to be interpreting the dream of Nebuchadnezzar that Daniel miraculously was given to by God, and so that we can learn what that means for us here today. Now, using the word sovereignty, this word really does bring us great comfort because we know that God is in control of all things. And if we know that God is in control of all things, then we can trust Him. And we don't need to worry about certain things happening on the earth and in our lives. So as we move into that, we're going to be teaching quite a bit on this, but this really gets into the overarching theme of the entire book of Daniel, which is that God is sovereign over all of human history, over everything. And that is being hit home here today. Now, there's different ways that sovereignty is used in our own talk day to day. We have different nations that say that they are sovereign, which means that they have supreme power over their own affairs. And we have other like countries that claim the same. And so, but they're equal but separate. But here's the deal. God is supreme over all. There is no one even sovereign but separate from Him. He is sovereign and everything else is under Him. Absolutely everything. Nothing in creation does not have the marks of God on it and His supreme authority over it. Now that also is going to make us ask a few other questions, but as we move into that, we're going to be talking about the kingdoms of the earth that God gave in a dream to Nebuchadnezzar, to which Daniel interpreted. And we're going to walk through that dream here today to help us to understand God's perfect sovereignty and how this really should change the way that we really view everything. If God is this sovereign that we're about to learn, then we should have so much comfort and peace in our lives that though the world may go in rage or things may fall apart, we can know that God's got us and that His promises are true. And then when He promises to save us and take us to heaven to be with Him, when it's our turn to die, then we can just lift up our heads and know that God's got this. So in the first two chapters, we had learned quite a bit about God's sovereignty over the situation of Daniel's life in Jerusalem, God's sovereignty over the other gods of the world, and God's sovereignty over prophecy, whereas we learned that none of the other false prophets could interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the king of Babylon, but only Daniel could through the power of God. And so with that, God protecting prophecy, protecting His name, showed that He is sovereign. And then through more prophecy of saying, here's how the world is going to go, here are the empires that are going to exist until I establish my kingdom, then as each subsequent one happens, man, that should just really build our faith to know, yeah, God said that a couple hundred years ago, if you were in the Maccabean period. Well, then if you're at the time of Christ, you'd be like, yep, this is right on par with what Daniel said 600 years ago. And at the same time, there is a prophesied kingdom that is going to exist at the very end before God comes to make His own kingdom. And this is what we learn about when we talk about the Christian idea of the end times, or the theological word called eschatology. So last week for part 2, we read all of chapter 2, but we only talked about the prophecy side of things and not the interpretation of the dream. So I'm going to reread that interpretation of the dream for us today so that we can dissect that and see how this can affect us today. This is Daniel speaking to the king. You looked, O king, and before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of gold. Its chest and arms were silver, and its belly and thighs were bronze. Its legs of iron, and its feet of partly iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, and the bronze, and the silver and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on the threshing room floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands He has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, He has made you to rule over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. Next, a third king, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things into pieces, so it will crush and break all others. Just as you saw the feet and toes that were partly baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of the iron in it, even as you saw the iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all of those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the cut-out rock of the mountain, and not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, and the silver, and the gold into pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Then Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him high honor and ordered that an offering of incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." So I'd just like to point out at the very end of that, this King of Kings, who had conquered basically kind of the known world at the time, had then exclaimed that Daniel's God was sovereign. So him in all of his might was able to see that with such an accomplishment of remembering a dream that he had forgotten, that Daniel was able to come up with the dream and tell him it, that it totally blew him away, and he realized the power that was at work that was in Daniel. Then Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed that Daniel's God is the sovereign God. So as we go back through those, let's take a look at that statue. So we're going to have some illustrations here to help you to understand what the statue would have looked like. Of course, in the ancient world, statues were very common. They were often used for worship. They were often used for iconography. They are often used for worship and idols. And so these things were considered that would be something that Christians would not do, is not to make engraven images of ourselves or try to glorify ourselves, but that we would glorify God. No such statues of humans existed in Israel when they were worshiping the one true God. We did everything and they did everything to send all glory upwards. But the kings of the earth loved to honor themselves, so they made themselves in giant statues quite frequently. So in this one, why would it be the golden head that would be Babylon? I find it interesting that God is the one who used Babylon to bring judgment on Israel because of their unbelief and their disobedience. And during that time, God's name was thrown into disrepute around the world, saying like, how did these Jews, these Hebrews get eliminated? Their God must be nothing. Now, as you remember from times past, God allowed them to be overrun simply because, well, and he was fine with his name being dragged through the mud because the Israelites had already done that for years. And so now he was fixing it. What is also interesting is for him to be able to place Daniel as chief of the astrology unit, if you will, and a governor in Babylon. That allowed Daniel to have significant influence over communication to the rest of the kingdom. And so by Nebuchadnezzar having controlled everything, and Daniel being a top diplomat, if you will, a top government official, Daniel was able to write and send and set the record straight in a very quick order, because there would have been lots of roads that were built and lots of caravans and armies moving to and fro that these messages could have gone to start rebuilding the name of the Lord God. Daniel's position helped him to do that. And that people quickly around the world were able to know that the reason why that God allowed Israel and Judah to be destroyed was not because their God was weak. It's because their God was strong and wasn't going to put up with the nonsense that they were doing. So that narrative was able to change because of Daniel's position that God gave him through prophecy, true prophecy. And see, God is sovereign over all the earth. He knows how to fix these things. And he used the pure power of Nebuchadnezzar, if you will, to make sure that message got out there. And Babylon was also a very wealthy country. It really didn't have a lot of rain, but it had two major rivers to which would drain from what is now modern Turkey. They would have had irrigation ditches to be able to help them to grow whatever farmed produced product they wanted, and with 365 days of sun each year. And so with relative ease of making food and plenty of sand to make baked in the sun clay bricks, they were able to grow an empire that was very wealthy. But even though it was good for food, it was not really always that good there for minerals. The same with Egypt. Egypt was also a sunny place, and the Nile River coming from far away, bringing the water for them to which to do their farming with. But they didn't have a lot of minerals there. This is why they often fought over Israel, the territory of Israel between Egypt and the Euphrates River, because those mountains were full of all kinds of minerals, from gold, copper, you name it. That's what they would do. So with that, Nebuchadnezzar, when he captured the other nations, he captured also their gold in quite massive quantities. That's kind of what his kingdom got known for, was gold. And it is also pure, which means that his power was also pure. When he spoke, and nobody would contest it. He was supreme in his authority of kings of men on the earth. And so because of that, his sovereignty and his strength is symbolized in the purity of gold and the purity of power, and those go together. However, he was not the strongest. Even though he was the strongest king personally and he was a brilliant tactician, there were other nations that would become stronger than he. So he had made an alliance with the Medes and the Persians before he had taken over Pharaoh and Israel and Judah. But by the end of his life, he had passed on the kingdom after he passed away, and the Medes and the Persians, the alliance that he was able to hold, they broke loose and they ended up taking over Babylon. And so with that, that became a stronger, they were more numerous in their people. They were not quite as prestigious. Their power was divided a little bit more because it was two different clans clamoring for power. So they don't have the purity of power that symbolized gold, but they were stronger, but with less power, symbolized by silver. Silver was also a common used item for them in that time frame in Persia. Did you know that it wasn't even until approximately this time that coins actually started to be made? Before this, shortly before this, and all history before that, you would literally bring just chunks of gold and chunks of silver that you would give to pay for things. And they would have weighing scales. So you'd just put weights down, like on those measuring things, to find out how much something was worth. There was no standardized coinage until about this time. And so with that, the Persians have taken over. They are the shoulders, arms, and chest of silver. Stronger, but not as pure in power. So then we move down the statue to the bronze midsection. And that bronze midsection represented the Greeks. So the Greeks, we have learned that they overtook the Persians. There was battles going on for quite some time after this, but by the middle of the 3rd century BC, Alexander the Great and his famed ability to take only 10,000 soldiers, and he conquered the whole known world, far more than what they even knew at the time. As far away as India and Afghanistan is how far he went in the east, and as far away as Spain and Gibraltar in the west. He really conquered everything. He really was something else. We're going to learn more about Alexander the Great in Daniel chapter 7, but I just wanted to put this in there that the Greek Empire started, but it had less power, except for Alexander the Great. It was less pure in their decision-making power. Why? Because the Greeks were a democracy. And so therefore, they're not as pure in their power as gold. They're not as pure in their power as even silver. They are bronze. It is a conglomerate of city-states that were made up of freed men and women to be able to make who their emperor was going to be and decide that for themselves. But yet they were stronger. They trained. We know that the Greek training of their warriors were legendary, that one soldier could take out many times his foe. And so with that, that is the bronze midsection. And bronze was also well known for the Greeks for their art, for their use of vessels made out of bronze, and even their ornaments and even armor. So it's pretty interesting to see how these metals actually do correspond with these nations. Well, then after them, we see that there's 2 legs of iron. Now, the 2 legs of iron, that represents the Roman Empire, which came after and overtook. And you know what? As these have been prophesied, they did come in fairly quick succession of one empire over the other, which they each only lasted about 100 to 200 years, each in their pure sense. Now, Rome was also divided. It was made from 2 brothers. Put in the comments section if you can tell me the founders of the Empire of Rome. What are the 2 brothers' names? Throw that in the comment section and we'll give you some extra points. Then beyond that, so it being the 2 brothers, maybe that symbolizes why there's the 2 legs. And the Romans were, even though, so iron is worth less than all those other ones by quite a long shot, but iron is also stronger. You know, those who first were able to forge iron swords were able to actually cut through their enemies' bronze swords and so win the battle. And so with this, Rome became known as an industrial powerhouse. They made more roads, they made more monuments, and they actually built other nations up, not just plundering them and taking them back to their own place, which was actually kind of a common practice. If you wanted to get ahead in the ancient world, you'd plunder somebody else. But Rome was industrious. They thought that they could grow as well as grow their influence elsewhere. To make it more permanent, they ended up started building things. Did you know there was Romans that paid for the reconstruction of the temple in the time of Christ? That the expansive grounds that we always take pictures of or use during Christmas time or Easter to show what Jerusalem looked like at the time of Christ, It didn't actually look like that. It was still being built. The walls and the ramparts and things like that, much of it was built, but the greater complex was not finished until the 60s, so about 30 years after Christ. And it employed 18,000 people. So the Romans were builders. And they were building, and they thought that if people were busy working, then they would fight less. And for the most part, they were true because, well, as soon as they stopped funding the temple was finished. 18,000 people got laid off in one day. And then within years, the Jews rebelled against Jerusalem. And then the brand new temple got torn down. Pretty interesting, huh? And so with that, that was kind of representative of Rome. Now, those are pretty much agreed upon by most scholars. The interesting thing here that comes up next is these toes, clay mixed with iron. What on earth can that mean? This is really interesting too, because if I were to build a statue of that height with those elements, I would not have put that on the bottom. I would have had the rest in that order because iron is stronger. If you put gold on the bottom, the weight of everything else would warp everything else. But you put the strongest on the bottom and the next on top and so forth. But what this describes is a fragmented people, a mixed people, and a divided kingdom too, because guess what's on each foot? 5 toes. So 10 toes in total, 2 different substances that were being mixed of. There's been interpretations over the years that this final earthly kingdom is going to be what Jesus replaces. Because remember, that rock that was cut out and thrown down to destroy it all is representative of God's kingdom coming to earth. Jesus Christ in his second coming to set up his millennial kingdom. And some of others have supposed that this is where God is bringing in heaven, actually. But we'll get to that in a moment. So back to these 10 toes. It is interesting to note that some people thought that this was as the Roman Empire was breaking up, it would turn into their own little colonial powers, mostly through Europe, as we understand it. And simply because there is definitely some congruity between the toes and the iron legs, because there's iron in the toes. So maybe this represents a more fragmented society that is based upon the after effects of the Roman Empire. Because this is interesting. All of those other empires that I talked to you about were decisively and quickly overturned by their predecessor. The Roman Empire just kind of fizzled out. It wasn't really conquered. It just really broke apart, like 10 toes. Interesting. Also, so some people suppose it's just all these divided kingdoms that will happen until the end. Jesus did warn about that 2,000 years ago. Nation will rise against nation. There's going to be times of division, rumors of war, and famines of all kinds, and pestilence. So don't be worried about that. The end is still to come. And that's in Matthew 24. And so if we could learn from that maybe that could simply just mean, one of the interpretations is that the 10 kingdoms are just simply whatever fizzles out until the end actually comes. And the next one is that some people believe that the Roman aspect of that society will become revived by the Antichrist in the last days. Meaning that if we look in Revelation chapter 17, it says that there are 10 rulers to that kingdom. And it's mixed up of a whole bunch of different things. And so it's kind of interesting to see some of these parallels. Now, none of these are a smoking gun for us to be able to say, for sure that's that. But these are interesting things for us to take note of. Now, if you also have note that when talking about the 10 toes back here in Daniel, do you remember what it said back in verse 44, where it says, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed? So he's talking about this time of the 10 toes as having multiple kings, and God's going to overthrow them all. So with that, this is a lot for us to understand about the toes in the end times, but clearly there is an aspect of the Romans that is going to continue on. For example, in the Roman period, actually everybody besides Jews in 2,000 years ago and earlier believed in what is called pantheism. Pantheism is a belief that all matter makes up God. And so that's why they had gods of everything, gods of clay, gods of iron, gods of gold. This is really a big part of it. Now, we disagree with that simply because if I could destroy this pulpit, for example, that would mean I've destroyed a piece of God. And I can't do that. God is sovereign. He is over us, and he is not subject to us. We cannot destroy even a piece of God. And so the Jews and then later Christians would have that idea of God's sovereignty so well that they would consider all these things just created items. And as science has improved over the years, we learn that that is so. However, we see with the rise of people thanking the universe for stuff today, you need to realize that that is pantheism. This is a revived Roman religion that is coming back into our society today, of people that are worshiping and looking at the stars and seeing that how they align, that this means this or that for their lives. The horoscope, all these things are based upon the Roman and all other ancient astrologies based upon pantheism, not a one true God. And then the last thing I'll say about the toes and the clay is this. It is interesting. Remember I told you that each metal actually had a significance to the kingdoms that it was representative of? So it makes you think, what on earth would clay and iron be representative of the kingdom that is surviving at the end? And I like to think, well, there's a lot that's happened in the last few hundred years. What is the world made of today? Rebar and brick. That's baked clay and iron mixed together. The nations that we have seen the Industrial Revolution that has just been an incredible powerhouse, but yet the kingdoms have never been more divided than ever. We have hundreds of countries on this earth, whereas before you would have just like giant empires that we honestly have never been more divided as a people, even though yet we're connected because we have all these different media outlets, the opportunity to go around the world and meet these people. And so there's a mixture, but it's really neat to think about that maybe what is the might behind the empire that exists today, even though it's not united as an empire. The Antichrist will be the one that makes it an empire. But the strength of today is economic prowess. How much brick and mortar can we make is what we say. How can we get this economy going again with bricks and mortar? And it is really interesting to think that I'm not saying, again, this is a smoking gun, but I'm telling you that the world is prosperous today because of clay mixed with iron. And so therefore, the last piece of this prophecy is that you guys don't worry about making statues for yourself. That's what mankind does. God is going to come and remove them all and all of the memory of them all. God is going to make it all new. He is just not going to be another empire that puts things together. God is making something that's independent of that chart, of that statue, which was a chronological order of empires until he returns. No, he's obliterating it and he's going to make all things new. That's his promise of heaven, is that he's going to make all things new. He's not going to take the sin and suffering of this world with us when we go to heaven. And so therefore, how much he's going to rule forever and ever after that, this should bring us incredible comfort. So all of this is to say, looking at God's sovereignty, of how all those other four kingdoms were already identified, prophesied hundreds of years before the events actually happened. And then now we are awaiting to be possibly the last generation before this mountain comes to strike. And so with that, this is why God's sovereignty in prophecy helps us and encourages us. It should bring us great comfort. So this is how we should feel about us. This is what really should kind of get us into action. Is like, if God's been that much in control, then I can really exclaim Romans 8:28. For God will work all things to the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Like, man, that's got to be comforting to know that God, if he has the nations from the beginning till the end already mapped out, he's got your life already mapped out from the beginning to the end, and he will give you the power that you need when you need it, when the time arises. Not before, not after, when. And so for us, that should give us an incredible peace that even though when we look at all the trials that you are facing, all the difficulties, think about it for a second. If you could make a to-do list right now of all of your worries, of all the things that you're unsure of all the things that you wish would be fixed right now so that you could have peace in your heart, then write all those down and know God's got those. He is sovereign over all of those. Man, doesn't it give you just a feeling just like sit back and to relax? Not to be lazy, but to sit back and to know God really does have this. I don't need to worry about these things. It is this power that God has. It is this sovereignty that God lends to us, his credibility, so that we can obey the words of Jesus, who said, "Come to me, those of you who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He said, and do not worry. Worrying will not add 1 minute to your life. It can't change a hair, black or white. So let us not worry. Let us come close to Jesus and encounter him so that we can find the rest that our souls need, knowing that he has it. He's bigger than our problems. He's bigger than our travesties. He's bigger than our past. And he's certainly bigger than our future. So let us trust him. That should be the overwhelming feeling that just comes over us. It's just like a weighted blanket to bring security, to know that we are covered by a God who loves us. And then so what should that do? Everything in the Bible, by the way, that talks about the end times, what should we do if this is kind of way it's going? Is we are to be alert and awake. Okay, it says that the only Christians that are really going to have a tough time at this point are those who are being slumbering. There's many parables that Jesus gives on that, like in Matthew 25, the parable of the virgins. We must be ready at a moment's notice. Not everybody is going to die in the tribulation. Not every Christian is going to have difficulty in persecution. But those who are awake and alert will be able to have the most pre-work in order to go. Remember Jesus said, hey, when the nation is surrounded, when Jerusalem's surrounded, that means you should flee. Do you know how many Christians died in AD 70 when the Romans came to tear down the temple? Almost none. Because when they saw the army starting to show up and make their formations, they're like, see you later. And they took off, and they did. And it was the Jews that ended up, the non-believing Jews, who ended up suffering so bad. So for us, let us be alert and awake. Let us be about God's business. Let us not treat our faith as it is just an add-on to our lives that we go to whenever we feel like we just need God, but that we should be having an incredible part of our daily life attributed to God. Again, I like to say this, is like, who is better to hang out with than God? This should not be a chore. If you ever think like, oh, here goes, Jason's telling me I got to pray in order to get ahead. I got to be able to read my Bible in order to understand. I'm like, no, we don't have to do those things. We get to. God is the coolest person you'll ever hang around with. He's the smartest, the most creative. It's incredible. I mean, I hope you have times of prayer time like that. I hope you are wowed by the sovereign history that God showed his control over, that can bring you that peace that you can encounter the living God in your prayer life, and that God is going to use you abundantly in this life and forevermore. I'm excited for what tomorrow might bring. Try not to worry about what tomorrow might bring, but I'm excited because, again, the famous saying is, I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. And our sovereign God, who is merciful, who is powerful, has told us that we are in the palm of his hand, and nobody can take us out of it. This should change the way we view the world on every matter. So let us keep praying. Let us keep worshiping together. Let us encourage one another while the days are short. Thank you for tuning in to Church on the Couch. God bless you. Have a great day.